Crime Curious is a true crime podcast that takes an in-depth look into true crime cases through the lens of a trained investigator and former prosecutor turned judge.
If you are sensitive to expletives, anatomical descriptions, and accurate descriptions of true crime scenes, this podcast may not be suitable for you.
Welcome to Crime Curious. I'm Charnell.
And I'm Megan.
And this episode's going to look a little bit different.
Yeah, so while I was gone, Charnell did an interview with a lovely lady, Amanda Quick, and we're going to plug it right here. Amanda has a book coming out called The Sex Trafficker's Wife. It's actually going to be released on January 10th, I believe.
Yep.
So you guys should all go check it out. I can assure you that this interview that Charnell conducted with Amanda, she gives a great overview, but she doesn't give you so many of the juicy details. You're going to want to read this book and get those details.
And January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
Great. Let everybody know that. It is. So if you want any additional information too, there are a number of websites. So go in, look up Human Trafficking Awareness Month for January. You're going to get a whole ton of links and it's just going to give you information on what human trafficking is. You know, when we had talked to Amanda before, because this is the second time that we chatted with her, you did this interview, but when we had talked with her before, it was really interesting. And even she indicated at the time that this was happening that she wasn't 100% aware, and I don't think the general public is of what human trafficking is. Because you think of human trafficking as, you know, trafficking people over borders, right? Out of the country.
Which is exactly what she thought at first.
Right. And you also think with sex trafficking the same, like you're kidnapping girls or you're kidnapping boys and you're performing sex acts on them. It can be as simple as becoming involved in an online relationship, often with minors. And then when the inappropriate criminal sexual type events start occurring, that's human sex trafficking, people. It's one of the definitions. So go look it up and make yourself aware. I'm really excited to hear this interview with Amanda.
It was a wonderful interview. Of course, we missed having you. The first time around, you guys will remember, the first time around we did this interview and it didn't record because we did not do our gree shaking beforehand.
Oh, shall we do that now?
Well, I did do it during the interview.
We'll do it
too.
Again.
I explained it to Amanda when I did this interview also. So the reason that Amanda wants her story to be heard is because, and interestingly enough, Megan, when they were doing comparables for her book, when her publisher was doing these, they couldn't find any.
Really?
Because she is one of the first people to tell the story from the wife's perspective.
Right.
There are not, I mean, many, she agreed with this too. We kind of talked about it during the interview, but many feel, I think, too ashamed to come forward and talk about that. And she doesn't want people to feel alone. If you, we don't often tell the story from the perpetrator's family's perspective.
Correct.
Right?
In fact, we can be judgy about it. I know that our listeners, I myself have said, how could she not know?
Yes.
How could this person not know their husband was a murderer, butchering people in garages and such?
Yep.
Sometimes they don't.
They don't. Yep. And Amanda absolutely did not. And she wants anyone out there who has been in the same position as her, not even necessarily with their husband being convicted of sex trafficking, but just any crime. She wants them to know that you're not alone. And that there are people out there that are willing to talk with you and help you, and you don't have to go into a scary, dark place by yourself. And it's a wonderful thing that she's doing, because she's not only bringing awareness to sex trafficking, but also helping the victims of the perpetrator's family understand, helping the world kind of understand exactly the kind of manipulation that happens and how this can happen so easily without their families knowing. And it's a story about her journey that way.
She's a survivor. It's a survival story. And if you like those, and most of us do, it ends well for her.
Yes. And my favorite, because she made sure of that.
She's resilient.
Sure. She is. And my favorite part is when she told me that, and I think this was off air, that the only name in the book that's not changed is the perpetrators.
That's lovely.
Yes. Yep.
That's lovely.
And she did not say his name in the interview.
Okay.
But it is absolutely in the book, because everything that she uses in the book about him is public record.
Fantastic.
Yep. Even their divorce situations.
Yeah. So again, this is some good content.
Yep.
And we hope that you enjoy the episode.
Yes.
We're just going to play it for them now, right?
Yep, we sure are. And, give us some feedback. If you like the interview style, maybe we will reach out for more interviews and just shake it up every once in a while with that as well. So
absolutely.
I hope you guys enjoy listening to Amanda's story. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So I am here with Amanda Quick, and just a couple of days from your book release, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And so this, obviously, we are a true crime podcast, and your story absolutely fits in with that. But you have a spiritual journey that you embarked on because of this as well, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
When I looked on your website, I thought I was kind of just looking for information about your book and your story that way, and then went down a whole nother rabbit hole, which was amazing. So we'll get to all of that. But before we kind of get started, I have to do something that we didn't do last time. And Megan and I are convinced that the reason that nothing recorded last time, forgot to do our typical shaking of our crystals.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, we have crystals in this little kangaroo sack, and I'm here to tell you this is a genuine kangaroo scrotum sack that was sent to us by a Australian listener. He is amazing. His name is Jason. And so it's become like this tradition. Then somebody sent us crystals that we put in it. And it's become a tradition that we shake it before each episode. And we didn't do that the first time that we recorded. And we are convinced that that was the universe saying, you did not use your typical ritual. And so that's why it didn't work out. So my audience will be happy to know that I remembered this time, and it's going to be okay. This is the episode that we told you all about that was amazing back in November. We did a 2-hour interview, and then getting to know you and whatnot and hearing your story. And then it just somehow our equipment malfunctioned for whatever divine purpose. So everything happens for a reason. But so here we are, and I don't know, for probably the millionth time, would you like to tell an audience your amazing story? And then I would love to hear about what inspired you to write your book and, that journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the story begins back in 2016. In April of 2016, I was a full-time stay-at-home mom. I had 3 kids. They were 1, 4, and 5, so fairly young. I'd been staying home their whole babyhood, and my husband at the time worked to support us. He worked really long hours. He traveled for his job quite a lot. And, we're a very traditional American household. Mm-hmm. Stay-at-home mom, man worked. We were upper middle class. We had a pretty comfortable living. And, I felt like, I wanted to be closer with my husband, but we had young kids and he traveled a lot. And so things weren't perfect, but they weren't bad. And one day he doesn't come home. He doesn't come home from work. And I already expected him to be later that day. But, it got to be 9, 10 o'clock. And I got one message from him asking if there was like food or leftovers. I said, yeah. And I expected him home in like 10 minutes. And then hours went by. And I truly didn't know what to think. I knew something was wrong because that was beyond normal. But at the same time, he often stopped responding to me. And I said, screw it, I'm going to bed. He'll show up when he shows up. I figured he went back to work or he got distracted or something. 2 o'clock in the morning, still no husband. I woke up to nurse the baby and realized he still wasn't home. And I called the hospitals because that was really beyond normal.
This wasn't usual for him. Yeah.
No. He was late, yes, but not this. Mm-hmm. They didn't have him. They didn't have any John Does, anything like that. And then 5 o'clock in the morning, I got the idea to call non-emergency dispatch because, the internet tells you have to wait 24 hours before you can report somebody missing, but it's like maybe they have some other idea. So I called non-emergency dispatch and the lady says, well, let me transfer you over to the jail, see if he's there. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll call you right back.
Right. Like he's not in the jail.
He's not there. That's ridiculous. And the shock of my life when the person on the jail answers and says, oh yeah, we have him. What? On what charge? Attempted human trafficking with a $250,000 bond.
Oh, wow.
Just shock of my freaking life. Like,
yeah.
What? Repeating, like, you sure?
Mm-hmm. Right. Do you have this guy's name right? Like, are we talking about the same person? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we lived in a small Colorado town. Like, it made no sense to me. I didn't even know what human trafficking meant. And,
Sure.
in my mind, I went shipping containers and borders and all, like, huh?
Right. Like taking people across the border.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like stealing people kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like, that's where my mind went. And I was like, that makes no sense.
Sure.
I don't understand. But at the same time, it was like my initial reaction was, well, I have to help because something is wrong. It wasn't, oh my God, my husband is guilty of these horrible things. It was something is wrong and I have to help him because he needs my help. Like,
I think that's a majority of people's very natural reactions because you know what you know of your husband, right?
Exactly.
We don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. And so my initial response was I called bail bondsmen, I called lawyers. I was like, okay, I'm on a mission. I got to figure this out. I got to get him some help. And part of me wasn't even totally sure that he was actually in jail and that somebody didn't like steal his wallet or something. But
sure.
I was still like operating with, well, we got to go figure this out. And so the bail bondsman and the first lawyer I spoke to said it was very likely that his bond was going to get reduced. So hang tight. And the bail bondsman actually agreed to go check on him that morning. And I was like, oh, please do. Let's make sure he's actually him. And we tried to go visit him in jail. You can't just walk into jail and try to visit somebody. I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
Had anything to do with the court system. But I did run into the bail bondsman who confirmed, in fact, that was my husband. And I was like, well, okay, at least he's not dead. Like, that's, where I was at that point.
Because at this point in time, you don't want him there.
No, but the alternative isn't very good either. So we found him. And then it was actually in the lawyer's office that next morning that he finally called me. And he called me and said, this is the first time they let me call you. They wouldn't let me call you all night. And I was under the impression still, like, I was like, don't say anything. I don't know what they're recording or what. Just, I know where you are. I'm in a lawyer's office. Like, we're getting help. That's where I was at. And I paid a lawyer a retainer so that they could talk to him on a non-emergency line. And, at this point, his mom is with me too. And we're all like, this isn't him. This doesn't make any sense. Something else is wrong. She was throwing all kinds of crazy theories out there. And I was just like, I don't understand. So the lawyer calls him and I get a snippet of information at this point. And he kind of reads me over his notes and says, there was an ad that he responded to and he didn't think any of it was real. He thought it was a setup. And I was like, huh? Like, what? Like, I didn't understand what he was saying. And I was like, okay.
Right.
So
like what ad is my husband responding to?
Like, an ad for what? I don't get it. Like, I really was dense here.
Yeah.
But the lawyer is trying very hard to just brush over it because he doesn't want me to just basically stop paying for it all. And because I had to fork over the money for the lawyer, even though I basically had to say, my husband is your client. You don't have to tell me anything. I'm also the one who just handed him a check.
Right. Oh, that is a bad spot for him to be in.
Right. So he's like reading over this, like, okay. And I leave going, okay, so this isn't just going to vanish. This isn't just some crazy mistake, but I still don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
We go to the bond hearing and so he's still in jail. We go to the bond hearing because we're told that they're going to reduce his bond and we should hang tight. And when we go there, we realize there's multiple defendants. There's like 4 or 5 men in orange, ankles shackled, wrist shackled, everything. The whole place is swarming with federal agents. Oh. And I'm like, whoa, what? This is a serious thing. My husband looks like shit, just totally disheveled. Looks like he hasn't showered in 3 days, and he kind of sees us and sort of acknowledges us, but definitely not doing well. And then we start to get a little bit more information. We realize, this is clearly a sting operation. There's more than one defendant. One of the defendants crossed borders. We were right on the line from New Mexico and Colorado, and he drove up and crossed borders, and that immediately went to federal court.
Oh.
Another defendant, they did reduce the bond, like everybody said. And so I was like, okay, this is good news. And then in my husband's case, they actually said they were intending on charging him with more. They were going to go from attempted human trafficking to completed human trafficking. And so they were asking not to reduce his bond.
Oh.
Everybody freaking out and like, and the lawyers all went up to the bench even. We didn't even get to hear the rest of the information, but they ended up not reducing his bond. And I'm like, what on how can this even get worse now? Totally freaking out. But I'm still under the assumption that something else is going on. My husband needs help. This isn't him. This is like somehow he's caught up in something. And
you don't know these other people that are in, having their hearings too, that were a part of this sting, right?
No, and none of them look like, they all, they look more like predators than what I would consider my husband. Like,
sure.
Like,
I like that you said that, because it really does show how we can't stereotype these things. And that was it. When I started as a CPS worker, I really thought that I knew in my mind what the first sexual predators were going to be that I had to deal with. And I can tell you only once in my entire time in CPS did a pedophile actually match the stereotypical description of a pedophile. The rest of the time, they looked like everyday normal human beings that you see in Walmart every day, or, out to dinner. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like, but, in my head, I'm profiling all these other people.
Yeah. And that even makes it even more confusing for you, I would think, too. Like, how is he lumped in with all of these other characters? Yeah.
Exactly.
Must be a mistake.
There's something. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know what happened here. So we had money in investment. So I cashed a bunch out and decided I was going to go bail him out. Because I needed to, he needed to get the hell out of there. He didn't belong there, was really where I was at.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, whatever, I'm going to go get you out. So I went and bailed him out. And he comes out, he's disheveled in the same clothes he'd worn 3 days ago. He's a mess. He gets in the car, he breaks down, starts crying, get me the hell out of here. Like, just, okay. And I start driving, and I'm just focused on like giving him some space, but also like, you need to tell me what's happening here.
Right. Like, you need to fill in some gaps here, because I'm 3 days now very confused.
Yeah. Exactly. And he starts talking, and he starts telling me that kind of the same thing the lawyer did. He says, there was an ad I responded to, and I didn't think any of it was real, and they wouldn't let me call you, and I'm so stupid. And he just kept like, I was like, huh? Again, what? An ad for what?
An ad for what? Mm-hmm.
And he says, oh, for escorts. Huh?
Oh, shit.
And he says, and I'm like, how long has that been going on? And he goes, oh, like forever. Just super flippant about it. It's like, what?
So here you are, just bailed this man out of jail, and you find out that your husband, is just flippantly telling you how much he's been cheating on you.
Basically, and I was like, how long has this been going on? For like forever, since he was like 20. Now he's, almost 40 at this point.
Gracious.
And I'm like, what? Like, except at this point, I'm in so much shock after everything that's been happened. I don't even have an emotional response.
Sure.
Like, I have no ability at this point to have an emotional response. I just sort of like try to take in the information, but I still can't feel it. No. And then he starts going on and on about how scared he is, and that, he didn't think any of it was real. And when they offered kids, that, he just felt like he had to report it, but he was scared to.
When they offered kids, see, this is the piece. My listeners don't know anything about your story, because I haven't prefaced this at all for them. So he was busted trying to buy children.
Correct.
Which explains why he was breezing over the fact that he buys escorts all the time. And you shouldn't be upset about that, because they're actually accusing me of buying children.
Exactly.
Oh,
so he's upset in his mind that he's being accused of this horrible thing when he was just doing this other not so good thing.
Oh, right. Like I'm a shitty person, but I'm not that shitty of a person, is essentially what he's trying to tell you.
And he truly believed for a long while that he was helping the escorts because he was paying them, and he was.
Oh, honey, no. That's what narcissists say. Yeah.
Yes. So I didn't know any of that. Really.
Of course not. Right.
But he's going on, and then he starts being like, "Should I run? Should I? We'll have to forfeit the money, but you guys, he just keeps going on." And I'm like, oh, no.
And you have 3 small children. You're going to go on the run.
Right. And I'm like, just calm down. Like, calm down. You know, we're going to figure this out. Like, if you're not guilty of that, we will figure this out. Like, you know, and my protective mechanism still come out with we'll get through this. We'll figure this out. Because on one hand, I can't even wrap my mind around the fact that my husband's admitting to cheating on me with escorts, let alone being a predator. And so he's admitting to this, and I'm like, oh, okay, but you're still in trouble for a hell of a lot more, because a human trafficking charge is an indeterminate to life sentence. And like, if all you've been doing is seeing prostitutes, that doesn't make sense. And yet that's where he's going. And so I'm like, we'll figure this out. We'll get through it. I don't know what that looks like yet.
No, but you're in survival mode, which doesn't process everything that it should.
No, it really doesn't. It's one foot in front of the other.
Yep.
And so then, you know, we start the criminal proceeding stuff. And I think all of this is going to be fast and we're going to be in court all the time. I have no idea how any of this stuff works.
Oh,
slowest freaking process ever.
It is. It's awful. It is.
But he wasn't arraigned until 10 days later. And so that's the official charge. And by then they had done a legal review of the case. And so all the legal teams had decided that they actually couldn't charge them with human trafficking. They could only charge them with solicitation of a minor. And I don't know the exact differences between them, but
probably because he didn't actually take possession of the minors. It was a sting operation, so there wasn't any children to actually
take possession of.
Right. Which, I mean, it makes it even, I feel like when you're going to set up a sting operation, like, don't you want to get them, you know, like really get them, not just slap on the wrist, get them. But I'm not the FBI or police.
I'm not, exactly. And so they'd done a legal review of the case. They reduced the charges. So he was only charged with solicitation of a minor. And they still actually didn't reduce his bond at that point. But, and this piece is in my book, and we don't have to talk about it in great detail. But the other big thing that happened to me is the morning that I got ready to get ready for the arraignment, I also found out I was pregnant.
Oh, gosh.
With my would-be fourth child. So I've added another set of trauma on top of all of this because
and things to consider.
And what the hell am I going to do with this?
Yep.
And so just from a state of mind perspective, I'm a disaster. I immediately don't think I can keep the baby, even though that's not something I had ever considered before in my life. But,
well, you've never been in this position before in your life, to be fair to you.
Exactly. And so, you know, I'm going through an intense amount of turmoil in myself with all of that. I go to the arraignment. It's like 5 minutes long or something. I'm like, you know, and then they schedule another status hearing for another 6 weeks. And I'm like, oh, this is going to take forever. And, you know, I tell my husband what's going on. I tell him that I don't think I can keep this. But I'm also really in total, I'm pulling myself apart in so many ways. And I feel like I'm supposed to stay and support my husband because I also have a ton of trauma from my own dad not being in my life when I was younger. And I had this huge belief that kids deserve to have both parents and that I needed to do everything possible to make sure that happened and that he would be better off if I stayed and supported him because he wasn't this monster. He just had some addiction issues that we needed to address, but he was admitting to them. He was facing them. He's like, this is going to be my rock bottom. I'm going to get through this. We're going to get through this. We're going to be stronger and better. And I really wanted to believe all of that.
Sure.
And so I just kind of continued to proceed as though, you know, that's what I have to do. And now at this point on bond, he's not allowed access to the kids at all. He's not allowed to be home. And my kids also start to struggle. They start, where's daddy? He traveled a lot, but he was never gone for very long.
Right.
And so it was like, when is daddy coming home? Especially my oldest, who was 6 at that time. And, you know, it was like, I didn't even know what to say. And so his lawyers thought that if, you know, I supported it, that we could get supervised visitation established for the kids. And she was right. And the next status hearing, we asked for supervised visitation. And so we started paying a supervisor like $60 an hour to come to the home and supervise interaction. And this period of time is probably, you know, it was really interesting in such a polarizing way, because it was so horrible on so many levels. But at the same time, this was the only time the kids ever really got that focused attention from him. He would come
Oh,
over
wow.
with new toys, new games. It would be like 2-hour daddy play date. And
Mm-hmm.
they loved it, because he was, he worked long hours. He was hardly ever around before. And this was like the focused time with him. And on some level, he was giving me attention in a way that he never had before either. And so, like, he wasn't allowed in the home and he wasn't allowed to be with us, but it was like we had this opportunity, we thought, in a sense, to have the family we never had before.
Mm-hmm.
And I still believed he was a good person that was just needing to deal with some things. And so it was like, is this going to bring us together in some other way? And one of the hardest parts for me still today to talk about this whole thing is really what our relationship looked like at that point, because I believed he was innocent of what they were charging him for. And I was upset about the cheating, but all of a sudden my husband was the person that I'd always wanted him to be. He was the man and the father that I always wanted. He was giving but all of us the attention that we, deserved in a lot of ways. And our relationship really changed. We almost had like a second honeymoon of sorts, because we weren't allowed to be together. That's what we wanted. And I would hire babysitters to go spend time with him. And, we would dream of what our life was going to look like after this was all over, and that we would, refocus on what really mattered in our lives and all of this stuff. And, and at the same time, at this point, the articles were out in the paper and it was public knowledge. And so I was also really, really isolated from anybody else in the outside world.
Sure.
Anybody else who reached out to me or wanted to bring food, or they wanted information, they wanted me to tell them what was going on with the case. They wanted the details.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell them anything.
Right. And you, at this point in time, and I think that it's important for people to understand, that at this point in time, in cases like this, you only have the information that the accused is giving you, right?
Correct.
So there are so many times where I hear people say, like, oh, well, I would have done this or I would have done that. You don't know what you would have done, because you don't know what information you would have had. I think that it's just an important thing for people to remember and to keep in the back of their mind as you, not only you tell your story, but as they read other. So yes, I just think that it is very important, because it's not like you have a case file in front of you. It's not like, with as long as the court system takes, there are so many families that literally spend 2 years or more defending their loved one, and then they go to trial and they sit through a trial and their minds are blown when they hear the truth of what the evidence is that comes against them. So I love that you're telling your story for my audience, and for the world, but so much this shows, you've got what he's telling you, and you want to believe everything that he's telling you, and he's showing you now that he could be a better husband. And exactly. I can only imagine how, in a small way, that must have felt really wonderful.
Exactly. And, when the first articles in the paper came out, the paper knew more than I did.
Yes.
And, the paper had the details of, the initial ad, and I didn't have that even. Mm-hmm. The paper knew that it was an 11 and 14-year-old that they offered. I didn't know. Oh,
wow. Because the paper can FOIA the arrest warrants and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I mean, you can too, but you probably didn't know to do that.
You don't know how to do that, right? Nobody knows how to do that.
Of course not.
And you don't even think to. You don't think to investigate it. You go, well, I'm going to go get the answer from the source. You don't. Right. And so.
Right. And how often has the media exaggerated and really tainted their own reputation, right? So
over and over and over again. And he had an answer for all of it. He was like, I didn't think any of it was real, and I had to find out if it was real so that I would report it. And so
that manipulation.
He was basically, and actually it was his sister who gave this analogy, that it's like if you were a drug dealer and they offered a rare tiger as a trade, and you can't go report them for, the animal stuff because you're a, coke dealer or whatever. Like, that's basically the analogy that she was giving. So that to justify why he couldn't just report it or drop it or anything, because he couldn't let it go if it was really kids. He really had to find out so that they could, actually be reported and arrested.
So his family was helping him justify his actions and falling under the manipulation as well.
They absolutely were. His mom kept going over and over again that he's a lot of things, but he's not this, and the kids need him, especially, my oldest, who's slightly autistic, really needs him. And, and everybody would talk about how much he hyper focused on things and how he much liked to solve puzzles, and to justify that it would make sense that he would do something like that just to find out so that he could then report it. Like, everybody in his immediate circle was supportive. It was all the outside world that had a bunch of judgments. And so I felt totally isolated. There was anybody who I would talk to would throw judgments at me. And so all I could do was push out all of the outside world, and I shut down social media. I disconnected literally everything. I felt my own family. I was like, they don't understand. My mom suggested I actually leave the state and go move closer to my sister. And I was like, how dare you? You took my father away. I'm not going to take my kid's father away. Like, I was all over that. And so the only safe person to talk to was my husband himself. The only person who could possibly understand what I was going through was the person who caused the trauma. And so it only deepened my trauma bond with him, essentially.
Oh, definitely.
So that he was my only safe haven. And, he had been the one financially supporting us. And yes, he had lost his job. And so people are like, well, but he lost his job and you paid all this money. Why didn't you just take the money and leave? Like, people don't understand how deeply tied you get to somebody else when you go through trauma with them.
Right.
And it's not just a financial safety. It's your entire identity that's wrapped into that. And so that's where I was through the criminal trial. And then he was evaluated for probation, and his lawyer, the lawyers that we ended up hiring, were out of Denver, and they were like the shark of the people to hire for this type of case. And they sent him to very specific counselors and therapists, very specific evaluators for probation. Like, they very much knew everybody in the state and who was the best one to go to. And so he went to this evaluator out of Pueblo, and they do a bunch of tests to like see what they're primarily attracted to and read a bunch of history and all that. And his evaluation for probation, according to the lawyers, was very good. But when I asked to read it, then there was new information again that I didn't have. And I learned that my husband not only was attracted to women, but that he had also had relations with men as well, which was news to me. Not that I don't care about.
Right. No, but I mean, he hadn't been transparent with you about that. Yeah.
It was another thing he was keeping from me. And really, what I wouldn't admit to myself at the time is I had 3 boys. And so I thought there was a level of safety there, but there wasn't.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
And so, but everybody else was saying this was good. That primarily he was attracted to post-pubescent women, and that he had a bunch of anxiety and depression, but that he had a support system and he was a good candidate for probation. That was basically the gist of the report. And when, after all of that was through, we got a plea deal offer. And what I later learned is most of these things get pled out and they never really go anywhere. And he was offered only probation, 4 years of probation for pleading guilty to attempted solicitation of a minor.
Wow.
Program, list on the sex offender registry, but no jail time. Even his lawyer was actually surprised. His lawyer thought he would get at least a few months.
Yeah.
But they didn't even do that. And so he was like, I have to take this. This is like,
this is a golden deal. You never have. I mean, I know. Wow.
But if you're innocent, why aren't you going to fight it? Like, that's where I was at still. Because he would say, like, well, I started to compose an email, or I was Googling how to report it or whatever. And I was like, if there's evidence that proves that you're innocent, why wouldn't you fight it? Why would you ever plead guilty to something like this?
Right.
And his lawyers were like, the evidence is stacked against him and nobody would ever believe a story like that. And so he had to take the deal.
Were they telling you at the time what the evidence is that's against him?
I never spoke to the lawyers. The lawyers didn't, they can't.
Yeah, right. You're not their client.
I'm not their client. And I never went to a meeting with him. I had 3 children at home.
Yeah.
Right. And so I never went to hear all of it. And I don't even know if I would be allowed to if I had. And so it was an easy separation. I only heard through him what they were saying. And so, and the other thing that happened in the state of Colorado is a few years before that, there had been a new precedent set with the Supreme Court. And the the new precedent was that a sex offense no longer removes your right to parent. It doesn't automatically negate that. And the precedent basically meant that the moment he pled guilty to attempted solicitation of the minor, he actually gained back his parenting rights.
Yes, it's like that in Michigan now as well.
Yeah. And so the Supreme Court ruling essentially meant that if he pled guilty, he moved back in.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were all ecstatic. Like,
Of course.
I don't have to do this on my own anymore. And it's fantastic and great. And so he moved back into the house. And I thought, okay, our life can get back to some version of normal now. And he got an offer actually to go to work with somebody he had previously known. It was a different company, but I thought this would be good for him. He'll have something to do. But his anxiety and depression was off the chart. He couldn't focus on anything. He couldn't do anything. He was already being medicated for depression, but it wasn't helping. And I started to realize pretty quickly that I needed to go back to work. I had been out of work for 6 years. It was, the years were just getting longer at this point. And so I wouldn't be able to make nearly the money he had made, but he'd lucky to even make half as what he used to make. But I needed to start. I needed to not have that bigger employment gap get bigger. And so I started to look for work. My youngest was now 2. So at least I felt better about leaving. And I realized my husband could be home if he wasn't going to go back to work. He wasn't allowed around other children. As a sex offender on probation, they have a lot of restrictions.
Yes.
But he was allowed to be around his own. And so I was still going to have to do pickups and drop-offs with the older kids. Any extracurriculars I still would have to do.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he couldn't go to schools, but he could go to the grocery store and he could watch the kids when they were home. And so that just was going to be how it is. And so I started looking for work, and I actually found something pretty quickly. And in April of 2017, I went back to work full time. And at first, it was terrifying because I thought that people were going to connect me to what they had read in a paper the year ago, and that they were going to, even my last name would somehow get connected and think that it was about me. And so I didn't tell anybody anything about my life. Like, they knew I had a husband and children, but I didn't even say his name. I didn't want anybody to know who I was in reference to anything. And it was like all of a sudden I created 2 bubbles. I had my home life and I had my work life, and they weren't. And for a little while that worked okay. And I was doing really good at work. I ended up actually getting promoted more than just a mom and a wife again.
Yeah.
And that was really good for me. Started to make things at home harder because all of a sudden my worlds couldn't intersect. And I started to actually start to feel the fact that my husband had admitted to cheating on me so many times throughout.
Well, now things have calmed down enough, right? That you can process fully and just try to move on. And you're like, wait, there's this huge elephant.
Yes. Yes. And it started to feel like there was ghosts in the room with us. Started to feel like every time he would look at me in a sexual way, it was, oh, that's how you looked at them.
Sure.
And I no longer wanted to be close to him. I no longer wanted anything to do with him. I would come home after work and I would have to drink half a bottle of wine to even look at him.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like,
only half? I'm proud of you.
Like, that's where I was. Like, I couldn't, and I could feel myself just repelling him. And at the same time, this idea that I was going to blow up my family after I just fought like hell to keep it together, I took all of that on myself. Oh. I was going to cause this problem. I was the one who would make those decisions. And I couldn't fathom that either. And so I just buried it all. And eventually I found myself attracted to a coworker because that's what happens.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you've literally been repelling your energy against from your husband. Yeah. You're human.
Exactly. And I found myself, and then I'm like, really, Amanda, you're going to go do this? And I decided that I wasn't going to cheat on him. I wasn't going to lie. I wasn't going to, I knew what that was like. So I was going to be honest. I was going to tell him the truth, and whatever needed to happen was going to happen. And so I did. And he was upset at first. And then he pretty quickly shifted to, well, we'll stay together and you can just go date. He basically was like, you just go get it out of your system. It's fine. Because I
mean, really, he doesn't have a whole lot of credence to stand on here when he's like, yeah, I've been doing this since I was 20. So
exactly. And at the same time, so he's like, we'll just stay together for the boys here. I'll move down. He moved bedrooms. And, on one level, I was sort of surprised because I thought this was going to be like a blow up of everything. And on the other hand, I was like, okay, maybe I don't have to blow everything up. Maybe I can just go live my life in a different way. And, dating was fun and exciting. And I got to laugh and have fun again in a way that I hadn't had in years. Because, I had 3 kids back to back and then this whole thing.
And you didn't have this negative feeling with these other people, this other person or anything. I mean, I bet that felt amazing.
It did. It was like there was no more ghosts in the room. And he adored me and wanted to have, do things so that, I would have fun. We went to music shows and road trips and different things. And it was like, oh, okay, life can be more again.
Yeah.
But it was also super messy because I was living with my husband who was on probation as a sex offender. We had 3 young children together. My boyfriend was a coworker. It was really messy.
Yeah. I can see. Uh-huh.
And then I got promoted and was going to be his boss. And I went, oh, okay, this is messy enough. And I realized that I needed to take a step back and I needed to focus on my family. I needed to figure out what I was doing with my life. And so I broke up with him. And that was hard, but we actually pretty quickly remained friends, and which was good. But my husband thought, oh, we can get back together now. You got it out of your system. We can get back together. I said,
sure.
No, that's not going to
happen. And now we're even. I'm sure he very much felt now we're even.
Yeah. You got yours.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I just was like, how dare you? How dare you? You don't get it. And, because anytime that I ever tried to get upset with him, even before all of this had happened, if I got upset with him for not coming home on time or for not being there or for anything at all, his immediate response was to play the victim and to make me feel guilty for ever having feelings.
Of course. Yes. No, honey, you're not allowed to have any feelings. No.
You're not allowed to because...
And your feelings aren't as deep and as, important as his.
And how dare I question his loyalty to the family and how, and all of these things, and so that continued. It was, and so I wasn't allowed to have feelings. I wasn't allowed to process it because he was a changed man now and everything was different. And couldn't I see that? And just on and on and on.
God, a guy buys prostitutes since he was 20 years old and tries to pick up children. And now what? He is just a bad guy. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how casual he would behave like this.
Totally. And so, I really started to really feel this disgust again with him.
Sure.
And he would start sending me explicit love notes. He would write out these crazy stories and then he would try to touch me and hug me. And I was like, no.
Love bombing. He's love bombing you. Yeah.
100%. And it wasn't working. And so then it was even frustrating him more.
Ooh. Yeah.
And I just felt boundary violations instead of affection.
Yeah.
And I was like, how dare you? Don't touch me. I do not consent. I was very, and so his response to all of that was to file for divorce.
Sure. Because he's the victim here, Amanda.
Yes, he's the victim. And a week after he filed for divorce, he also filed the temporary orders to kick me out of the house. He wanted me to move out because he was going to be the primary parent and I was the one work. I had abandoned my family and...
Oh, yeah. This is a classic narcissist move.
Yeah. And honestly, I was about as mad as I have ever been at him because this was another violation. This was an even bigger violation because it was directly connected to me as a mother and my children.
Right.
And you're going to remove me from the home after everything I did to support you?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yep. This is just like if someone is physically violent and then they're the first person to call 911. If that person tries to fight back and makes contact somehow, even if it's a very small way, they'll call 911 first and say, my wife is beating me up or my partner or whatever. When it started with them. They were the first person to be the perpetrator. It happens all the time.
Yeah. And so he continued with that. And then the temporary orders hearing, which took 6 freaking weeks to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We had actually already purchased another home, in fact, and he had been refusing to move into it. And so the judge was like, she wants him to move. He needs to move. Like, get out. And that was, but he also spent that entire hearing talking about how much of a horrible mother I was and how I'd been cuckolding him in his own home and how I was out dating.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And, obviously, he's a changed man and blah, blah, blah. And
right.
His treatment provider and his PO both said he was compliant with probation. And so the judge said, because of all of that she had no reason to remove any of his overnights, and that it would have to be 50-50 for that temporary orders, because I was trying to suggest that he not get overnights at first. And they basically said in the state of Colorado, unless there's a very valid reason not to, they couldn't remove it.
Yes.
And so we ended that very tenuous hearing with 50-50, except the schedule that was provided was actually 4 times back and forth between us a week, which was nuts.
It's a lot of transition time for your kiddos.
He liked this idea because then he would see them more often. And I was like, this is going to be crazy making, but it was like the last 5 minutes of a hearing and they're about to kick us out. And there wasn't really nobody had planned for this part. So we started that and he moved out and the kids started going back and forth, and pretty quickly their behavior started to get worse and started to change. And, obviously divorces are hard on everybody. New transitions are hard on everybody, but they started to become very angry with me. And they would say things like, why can't you forgive daddy? Why can't we be a family again? And I was like, that's not how this works. But he was telling them that
parental alienation,
100%. And I was the reason that we were breaking up, and that
it had nothing to do with the daddy's escorts.
Nothing at all.
No.
And so it was we were trying to the next step is in mediation. And I didn't want to settle parenting time at all, but we finally, after a lot of debate, settled finances, which was very good. I actually had to agree to give him slightly more finances than not in order to get that settled, but at least we wouldn't be going to court over it all.
Right.
He actually tried to say he contributed more. He used a contribution argument to try to say that he should get more than 50-50 because of the amount that he worked. Yeah.
Okay.
But regardless, it would have costed more to fight it in court. So I didn't. But at the mediation, what we ended up deciding was we needed to get a parental rights evaluator in part of the case. And every state's different how all of this works, but there's always some way to get a third party in to come make a recommendation to the court after interviews and evaluations and all of that. And so in Colorado, it's called a parental rights evaluator. And he was pissed that we didn't just settle. But I couldn't make a decision. I was having the hardest time even figuring out what made sense, because I knew something wasn't quite right, but I didn't know what. He was on probation as a sex offender. He couldn't do all the things, and he wanted 50-50.
And you've literally never been in this position before. I mean, how are you supposed to make these decisions and now your kids are acting completely differently and having all these behaviors, and that's a lot.
And I'm feeling attacked, but at the same time I still have this belief that the kids need their parents, and
sure.
And so I'm struggling, it was actually the mediator that was like, he can feel all of that. And that's because he kept at this point, he was trying to get me to drop the whole divorce. He wanted to not file for divorce anymore.
Okay.
He was trying to get me to throw it out. And I was like, you started this.
Right.
And it felt like he was just trying to use the court system to bully me. And when it didn't work, he's like, oh, never mind. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yep, exactly. Like, no. It backfired on him.
I was like, no, we're not getting divorced now. And so eventually, we got the parental rights evaluator, and she did full psych evaluations on both of us. She interviewed everybody we knew, everybody in the whole thing. I'm psychologically normal, believe it or not.
I believe it.
It's good to have that confirmation.
Yep.
And he was diagnosed with major depression and anxiety and dependent personality disorder through the the psych evals, which
Sure.
made a lot of sense. He had
Yeah.
been dependent on all these other people to meet his mental and emotional needs. But what started to happen was he started to become dependent on the children to meet his mental and emotional needs. And so he was telling them, adult information in a lot of ways and talking about the court cases and using that to alienate them against me. And it got to the point that they started to become even physically violent, even come to my house.
Oh gosh.
Kicking and screaming and I don't want to go to mommy's and, the video games and the sugar and all the things, but mommy holds boundaries. And all of those things were adding to it. And right before the report and the recommendation came out, we had probably the worst transition ever. And it took over multiple hours for them to actually come to my house. They kept running back away.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I didn't know it at the time, but he actually recorded the whole thing and sent it over to the evaluator, transcripted out, which was fantastic because she got to call him out on every single
They
time.
love it when people do that. It cracks me up because they think that they're going to prove, Amanda, that you are a terrible mom and that these kids don't want to be with you. And what it does is shows them exactly what the problem is, which is him.
It's exactly what happened. He was like, she's not warm and welcoming and they don't want to be there anymore. And all it did was prove that he was enabling their behavior. And he was telling them, I think she said she counted over like 20 plus times how much he loved them and how silly they were being and just totally enabling it.
Yep. Literally rewarding them for acting that way, not being a supportive co-parent and trying to support them in going to your house. No. Rewarding them for their behavior. Yeah.
Yes. Which had been obviously escalating. So this was, to the point. And so, the report came out and it was really detailed. She did an amazing job, but because of the statutes in Colorado and what they have to prove is the recommendation was still essentially 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
It was still essentially 50-50 with a handful of considerations for his probation time. And she suggested that I get slightly more decision-making when it came to school and extracurriculars because we were fighting like those or like crazy.
Well, and literally he can't take them to school, right?
He can't, exactly.
Right.
And so it made sense. And so we said, okay, we'll try. We clearly, I can't fight this forever. And so we offered a settlement, which was basically what she suggested. And he ignored the settlement completely. Mm-hmm. He could not handle that I would be even given slightly more decision-making. That was really difficult for him. And the settlement went ignored for over a month. And during that month, my middle child's behavior started to change even more. And he was 6 at the time, 6, almost 7. And he started coming on to me in an almost sexual way. I had picked him up special from school one day and wanted to watch a movie. And it was very special one-on-one time. And he climbs into my lap and tries to kiss on me. And I'm like, buddy, what is going on? And I could start to feel there was something else happening and I couldn't, the words grooming kept coming up and, that's a terrifying thing to start to even look at. And I was telling my lawyer, things are not okay. And we still continue to have difficult transitions back and forth. He didn't get what she was telling him in the report. He didn't get it. And now things are getting worse. And then the bottom drops out again. And I'm driving them to school one day and I'm giving a presentation at work or something that day. And my head is totally focused elsewhere. I'm pulling into the school and my son says, sometimes I suck on daddy's fingers. Fingers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I don't even respond.
Sure.
I can't respond. I can't have a reaction to that.
Right.
And it's just, that's okay. Have a good day at school.
Right.
I sent him on his way and what do I even do about that?
Yeah. Where do I start? What do I,
We're in the middle of a high conflict divorce. If you make another accusation against the other party, you will be considered to be causing parental alienation. Mm-hmm. So I call my lawyer and my lawyer's like, we can't just jump to conclusions here. We can't do that. And then I spoke to my kid's therapist. They had been in therapy and she said, you need to ask him to show you. You need to ask him to show you what that means. And so a couple weeks later I did. I asked him to show me and he did. And it's as bad as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And then I called her back and she said, if he had done that in front of me, I would have had, as a mandatory reporter, I would have had to report it.
Right.
And that was enough for my lawyers to say, okay, you can report it. So
Also, I mean, you just telling her that she's a mandated reporter.
She said that
just so
unless
you
it
know.
happened in front of her, she couldn't do that. But
Yeah, that's not how mandated reporter law works in Michigan. That's what I'll say.
So she said it without it being in front of her, but that she would have had to report it in that instance. And so from my lawyer's perspective, okay, yes, go ahead and call.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, you have all of the reasons to do that. So I called Child Protective Services and I made a report. And I also informed his probation and all of them as well that I had made a report.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just wait. This is like the terrifying part with CPS. Like you put a report out there and you don't, and we're in the middle of like transitions every other day.
Yep.
And I don't know what to do.
In the state of Michigan, as a CPS worker, we have 30 days to complete our investigation. And we may wait until that 30th day to go and contact the mom or the reporting person or anything. I mean, that's not how I ran my cases, but it does happen. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the next day was actually a him pickup day. And so I didn't hear anything from anybody. And
oh, gosh.
I'm sleeping at this point. Like,
right.
I don't know what's going on. And then the following day, the caseworker calls me and says he wants to interview my son. And I said, okay, well, it's my pickup day. I'll go get him. It's fine. And he meets me at my house. And he sits down at the table and he's just started talking. And my son is there. And I use the word therapist because that's one he understood and knew as far as a safe person to talk about things. And so I kind of said, this is like another therapist, somebody you can talk to. And the CPS worker goes, so your mom told me about the game you play with your dad where you suck on his fingers. Do you still do that?
Oh my God. No, that is not how you forensically interview a child.
It wasn't a forensic interview, obviously. And my son is terrified. He's literally hiding under the dining room table as this is happening. Like
certainly.
He won't even come out and talk to the man. He's like, and so my son just is like, no, we don't do that anymore. Like,
mm-hmm.
and so, and I'm trying to have this conversation with this caseworker and I'm like, there's this history and, all these things. And the guy's like, well, we'll go interview dad and I'll get back to you.
And he has no previous history and dad's going to deny it and case closed.
So he goes and interviews dad and dad says, well, that was some silly game and we stopped it. And it's no big deal, nothing. And the case was closed.
Can anyone think of a silly game where you ever want your child to put your fingers in their mouth? Like, no. Sorry, I love my kids dearly, but even as little kids, I wouldn't let them do that.
And even if it happened in a kid's being silly, it would have never triggered something they would even talk about unless it went on for more than a split second.
Right.
And so he dropped it.
That makes sense.
Probation, and I found out later probation actually did ask him to not see the kids until they polygraphed him, and they polygraphed him, but I later learned the only questions that were asked is if he'd ever gone further with anything and whether he'd actually touched them in any way. They didn't actually ask what I reported.
Oh, about like, hey, have you had your child put your fingers in his mouth? Okay.
Yeah, they didn't actually ask those questions. Yeah. They only said, is his genitals being touched in a sense?
Right.
That's all they were concerned about. Never mind, the fact that how those things get
the grooming behavior that happens before the bad thing happens. Yeah.
Exactly. But when I tried to actually contact his probation and his therapist, I was told that I was no longer allowed access to any of his files and I couldn't see any of the information. So I didn't actually find that out till months later either. And I was like, he has access to my children and you're telling me I can't actually even see anything?
Right.
Because he had removed my access from a HIPAA perspective.
I
couldn't. And I was like, oh. So at this point, I feel completely helpless. Completely and utterly helpless. CPS won't do anything.
Yeah.
My lawyers can't do anything. The evaluators basically still can't do anything. I'm like, what possibly, like, I'm going to end up sharing custody with a man who's going to abuse my children.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not lost on me at this point that this is a man who was arrested for trying to have sex with an 11 and 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hello.
All this now feels very, very real. Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, it's all of the red flags that I didn't see for years before that in my face. All of the ways that I had completely been gaslighting myself and allowed this to continue coming back in front of me. Like it's blaring. And And I also feel like there's nothing I can do about it, that the system is not set up to protect anybody. It's something has to happen in order for them to take it seriously. And even then, something big enough has to happen, and it has to get caught in a way that, and I'm like, you're basically going to wait until my children are sexually abused before they'll even consider it.
I always say our system is built to be reactive instead of preventative.
It is.
It's how the law is written. It's so true.
And as a mother who, is going through this, like, we were never interviewed. We were never contacted. They never searched our house. There was, like, I was completely isolated from anything.
During the criminal proceedings, they never searched your house. They never took, looked, oh my gosh.
No, they never searched us. They never, nothing. They took what he had in his car, and that was it.
And then literally made him a deal.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
I don't even think they actually went through it, truthfully.
Yeah.
And so I'm at this point where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, the drive to put my kids in the car and drive cross borders is so high. Mm-hmm. But obviously that would be considered kidnapping, and I would be put behind bars. So
right.
Like, and so I'm talking to my therapist at the time. And, and she's like, I don't even know what to tell you. Like, the system is like, she's like, I'm surprised that nobody's doing anything also. Yeah. And then as I'm leaving her office, she goes, have you ever thought about seeing a psychic? And I was like, what? like fortune teller is where my mind went. Cause I'm completely agnostic, completely,
Right. What? Like, I can't believe this woman is saying this to me, or this person is saying this to me.
Traditional mental health therapist asking me this.
Yeah.
And she's like, and I was like, do you know anybody that's like real? Like,
yeah. Like, is that that's a real thing? Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, I do. And I do. And I said, well, I'll try anything at this point. That's really where I was at.
Fuck it. I mean, when you're at the point of considering crossing the border, I think maybe you would try anything right now to avoid that.
And I'm like, okay. So she sends me the info over, and I make an appointment, and I walk into this lady's office, and, I'm totally there's crystals and deities and all these things everywhere. And actually when I had called to make the appointment, she answered the phone, and there was an availability, and she's usually like months out. And so she was very like,
this happened for a reason. Mm-hmm.
And so she starts talking to me about a past life. She says, this is the loudest karmic echo I've seen in forever. And
oh wow,
she's talking about this past life that she's reading, where 500 some years ago in the south of France, that we were together and things were okay-ish until the kids came. And in that life, his drug of choice was alcohol, and he was physically violent. And I tried to protect the kids from him in a lot of ways. And the way she starts talking to me, all I can hear is everything that I had been telling myself over the last 4 years about how I have no choice and I have to stay. And she's like, back then you couldn't even own property or anything like that. You felt like
how dare you be a woman 500 years ago? Yeah.
And she's like, but the way she's saying it's like, I'm hearing all of these things and the reasons that I stayed the whole time. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, this lady's in my head. This is creepy. I'm listening. And then she starts telling me that things started escalating, and in this life he beat me to death and threw me down the stairs and in front of my children. And she's like, I'm watching it happen. And as she's talking to me, my thought in my head is what happened to the kids. And then she says, I know your dying thoughts were, who's going to take care of my kids? And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, wow.
And so like and my whole body is revolting and reacting to this. And I'm like, the fear is in my system in a way. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to understand that the reason I'm so scared of him is because of all of this, because he'd never laid a hand on me in this lifetime. Mm-hmm. And
he abused you in other ways.
He was mentally and emotionally abusive, but he never laid a hand on me. But I was terrified of him. I felt like he was always stalking me and always trying to be one step ahead of me. And I was physically afraid of him, but it didn't make sense until all of a sudden I started to understand my body still was holding on to this fear. And she said, you have to get a hold of the fear. You have to get a hold of the fear if you're going to stand up to him, because you're not 500 years ago. You can own property. You can do things. And the reason your angel sat you down in this chair is because you need to make a choice. Mm-hmm. You need to make a choice that you are done with this pattern. You were done with him once and for all. And I was like, I did choose. I'm doing all the things. She says, no, you really haven't chosen yet. And she wasn't wrong. There was still a part of me that didn't want any of this, that wanted my family back together, that wanted to believe that he could get better and heal, and that none of this was even happening. I was still holding on to some possible outcome there. And I was still hoping that it was going to get better some way. And so I was like, okay, I see it. You're right. I'm done. I'm done. And I stood up and I just let it all go. And I didn't know what I had done energetically in that moment, but I collapsed a huge pattern and a huge thing for myself. And she says, okay, I can help you now. She says, like, you have more people that want to help. There's more people out there who want to help you. You just need to keep going. You need to keep trying. You know, she's like, the judge wants to help you. You just have to give her the reasons. And, you know, the evaluator wants to help you, but you've got to keep going. And there's more information and more data out there. She believed he had porn in his possession. And she's like, if you can find that, that'll blow up his whole probation. But like, you have to keep going. And she also felt from a him perspective that, you know, he had lifetimes after lifetimes of abuse himself, but he was not choosing to address it. He had no interest in getting better. And I really felt like I needed to hear that on some level. That he was not interested. He was just wanted to dig his hole even deeper.
He's not going to learn his lesson in this life.
And so I had to let all of that go. And I had to look at, I cannot save anybody. I have to focus on me, and I have to focus on getting myself out of this situation, and by extension, my kids.
Yep.
And so I left that office with a whole new level of resolve. Like, okay, there's more I can do. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it. And I actually went back to work and started talking to some coworkers. And the first coworker I talked to tells me she has an uncle who works for ICE. Oh. And she said, I'm going to call him. She says, I don't like any of this. I'm going to call him.
Right.
I said, okay. And then they put me in touch with Homeland Security, who puts me and Homeland Security was appalled that we were never interviewed. The children were never forensically interviewed.
Oh, yeah.
Searched our house. They were appalled.
Sure.
Like, what?
Yep.
They also got me in touch with the arresting officer that put the cuffs back on him in 2016. He was a Homeland Security agent who was local to our area, who also got me in touch with the local police department, who they ran the sting operation in conjunction with, who the guy who stood next to him when he put the cuffs on him in 2016. So I got in touch with the actual people who had run the case.
Yes, that you had not had access to or even realized that you could have access to prior to this moment.
No, I didn't. And so they both vowed to help me. Basically, they were like, we want to help you. We know him. We remember him, and and we want to help you. The local police officer actually got the CPS case reopened, and they did finally do a forensic interview. But too much time had passed and there was no disclosure. But he was very clear with me. He's like, just because there was no disclosure, all it means is there was no disclosure. It doesn't mean nothing happened.
Yeah, right.
And so, but he was really trying. He actually tried to get the probation officer to give him access to his devices, because probation technically can get access to any of their devices.
Yeah.
Probation denied the request and said, no, he's perfectly compliant. We're not going to let you do that.
Nope, he's playing the game, so we're not going to let you do that.
Yeah. Probation didn't even care that he was in violation of his probation terms and conditions, because he paid the probation bill. That's all they cared about.
Right. Yep.
And so
I want to point out in this story really quickly for the listeners too, is that just because a lot of times in cases that we cover, Amanda, we hear about shoddy police work, right? And Megan's husband is a police officer. I have very dear friends that are police officers, and they're damn good officers. But sometimes where the problem can happen is when it comes down to when it's flipped to the prosecutor, which Megan used to be a prosecutor, as a matter of fact, before she became a judge. And so she'll probably giggle when she hears this part, that like there are times where literally once it's in their hands, you know, the arresting officers and the investigating officers, their job is done. They can do no more. And they get very frustrated with the outcome of cases sometimes too, because it doesn't go the way that they want to. And I feel like that is kind of a part of what's happened here too.
It is. When speaking to both the local police officer and the Homeland Security agent, they were both very upset with how the case was handled on all levels. They were very frustrated that these guys were basically out scot-free.
Yeah.
They, you know, they don't control the rest of the warrants and the rest of the things that happen.
Right.
They
That's
don't
what I
control.
wanted to point out too. They could have asked for a warrant to search your home and been denied.
Yes.
So
Like,
it's hard for them.
exactly. I mean, they can't do anything without the authorization. And
Yep.
so they were very frustrated with how all of it went down. And so then for me to come back around, they were like, okay, we'll help you as best we can. And so what I started to do is every person who popped into my head, I would call them. And I had this realization that everybody knows somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And those somebodies know somebody. And so I started talking more. And, I had people calling caseworkers outside the county to try to get information. I had people, reaching out to anybody they knew. It was actually my realtor who suggested that I call the district attorney myself. And I was like, okay. And I called him and he says, I can't actually help you, but what I can do is I can unseal the case file.
Oh,
And
yes. Amazing.
they seal it because there's identifiable information on it, but as soon as they redact it, it can be unsealed and it is complete public record at that point.
Yep.
And so he said, I can do that for you. And I said, absolutely. I have not seen this.
Yes. This is 4 years later.
Yes.
Yeah. 4 years later, you get your hands on the case file finally to put the pieces together of what really happened.
And I had to actually ask for it. I had to go find somebody willing to unseal it for me.
Yes. Yes. I love that you called every person who popped into your head. Like there is a reason why you were given those thoughts,
Exactly. And I had people suggesting that I go up the chain of command in probation. And so I would send emails like that. Like I would go anywhere and everywhere. And I had this drive in me. It was like, I won't fail until I stop. And I cannot live with myself until I know that I have left no stone left unturned. Like I'm going to, whatever it takes. And most of the things were not fruitful, but the ones that really were the big ones.
Yeah. Were necessary.
And when I saw that case file and I actually got to read the transcript between the undercover agent and my husband at the time, I had no more doubts in my mind. And I have completely transcribed it in my book.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's important for people to read and it's public record. But
yep. I'm not going to lie. I am here for that juicy detail. I cannot wait to get my hands on your book, which at the end, we will tell everybody exactly where to get it and all of that stuff. Plus Megan and I will talk about it too in future episodes, but I
transcribed it. It was really, I mean, most of the case files, just everybody's report and the police report, which were all very similar, but that piece really got it. And, I had 3 kids with the man. I had been intimate with him for many years. I knew some of his preferences.
Sure.
When I read that, there was no more question in my mind.
Right. And had you seen that 4 years ago, you probably would have had the same aha moment of,
I
okay.
Hope so.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but I at the same time, I didn't see it then. And I had no access to it.
Yeah, you had exactly. You were, and something that you're saying now that I'm realizing too is that back then you were so closed off and isolated from people. You weren't talking to people, so no one was hearing your story and giving you guidance and saying you should call so and so. You could get this information. It wasn't until you opened up to connect with other people that information started to flow.
Like, oh, you don't have to stay. Like that's all I could just hear judgment. Like I couldn't. Yeah. It wasn't. Oh, you should find out more.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, you don't have to stay. And I'm like, that's not. I don't know. Yeah. And so when I got that, I also started listening to my kids in a different way. I started listening to my son and I started to realize their behavior wasn't their fault. Their behavior was, a reaction to what was happening in their environment. And there was so much stuff going on with my middle child. I started recording information with him. I found out that his dad had been climbing into bed in his bed in the middle of the night, his child's bed. I started reading books about keeping bodies safe and private parts private. And I started, and I got to the point where they talk about if anybody shows you pictures of naked people, that's a red flag. And my son goes, well, it's okay if it's animated, right?
Oh,
and it's got all of this data started to come through. And I was like, every time. And we actually tried to file a motion to restrict, which would immediately restrict his parenting time. And it didn't work. And like the judge basically said, we'll see it all in court when we go to court. And I just had to trust that more had to come through. Every time something didn't quite work, okay, there's more information I need. There's something else here that I need. And the next set of evaluations that came through the recommendation was that give him slightly less time because the evaluator was afraid that if she suggested supervised time, that he would use that entire time to continue to alienate the kids against me and that they would lose both parents.
Mm-hmm.
And she believed that he was so far, she was actually trying to protect me by giving him a little bit of parenting time. But she said that he would not have any decision making because she was also diagnosing him with passive aggressive personality disorder because
Sure.
the level of conflict had escalated even higher. We had like full on hostage situations between transfers at this point.
Wow.
Like my PTSD was through the roof. I was having panic attacks over every single text message. And I mean, not only was I seeing my kids be in danger, but every single interaction with him was now further escalated. And it was always a negotiation, and it was insanity. And so at that point, we were ready to go to court. Our final court hearing was scheduled, and I knew that this was going to be the fight of my life. And it's the first time that I really stood up and really said my piece and really said how dangerous I believed he was and how much I didn't know about what happened before and how everything changed. And the evaluator did an amazing job with her reports, and we were able to basically say that with his depression and anxiety and with his personality disorders and with his clear addiction patterns, that he very likely is grooming the children, even if he's not 100% consciously aware of it.
Yeah.
And because he didn't believe he was doing anything wrong, and so we were able to prove that. We were also the only person who qualified as an expert witness was the evaluator herself. His probation officer, the therapist, everybody else was just their opinions because none of them were holding him accountable to anything.
Right.
And then I was able to bring through, even though it was technically hearsay, the judge very much wanted to see where I was at. And so she let all of my evidence through about my state of mind and why I was behaving the way I was behaving. So all of the recordings of my kids, all of the case file, all of that data was able to get through in the case.
Oh, wow. The case file and that's amazing.
Yeah. We got all of it through.
Good.
And even actually the cop showed up to even certify it as accurate and all the things.
Wonderful.
And so all of that was able to come through. I was able to see my piece, and the judge was honestly appalled that he was sleeping with them.
Yeah.
And immediately ordered him on the spot to stop doing that. But she had to go through it all before she made her final order.
Right.
And the final order came through March 3rd, 2020, which was the day before my birthday and 2 weeks before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And she basically gave him one last chance. She said he had ignored everybody's recommendation for everything before. He had been asked multiple times to give disclosures, to give me access to things, to have other therapy stuff. He ignored all of it. He refused to get a job, even though it was a probation terms and conditions. He refused all of those things. And she gave him one last chance. She said, if you do all of these things in 6 weeks and you file a certificate of compliance, you can have a little bit of, that every other weekend or whatever that recommendation was. And if you don't, you will only get supervised visitation. And she had pulled his parenting time down to like 2 afternoons a week, and basically said, you figure it out and you can have some time or you don't, and you will get none. And regardless, I will have full decision making no matter what.
Okay.
He did not a single thing on that list.
I'm sure not.
And so the kids had every other week, or like 2 afternoons a week during the beginning of the pandemic, and 6 weeks later was the last time they ever saw him, because he not only didn't exercise his supervised visitation, we have not had a phone call, a text, anything since the end of April.
Wow. Of April 2020.
Yes.
We're almost 3 years later. Wow.
Yes. So the moment he lost
his fight against you. It was never really about the kids and wanting time with the kids. No, it was all about keeping that power and control over you. Mm-hmm.
The moment he lost decision making, and then the moment that he no longer could be in control of me and my life and use the kids for that,
he's gone.
Completely vanished.
Yeah, there's no interest there for him. Oh, that's terrible.
He has not paid a dime of child support, and I keep it. I don't care. I don't want it.
Right.
It's literally been he vanished.
Mm-hmm. How are the kids doing though? So, I mean, I have you on Facebook, so they seem like they're doing wonderful. They're so adorable.
It took some time, obviously.
Sure.
The loss of a parent is hard on anybody, no matter what. I think on some level, I mean, so what nobody knew was the pandemic was about to hit when all of that happened. They were not. So when they went home from school, they were with me. They were never quarantined with him. They were with me full time. And as hard as our relationship was, it actually gave us a huge opportunity to heal because everybody was home full time.
Yeah.
And everything about their life changed in that month.
Yeah, there's no more transitions, all of those things. Stability.
It was a totally different version of stability and opportunity to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple of times where they got upset with me and why won't I let them call daddy, and I had to be, every single time it's come up, it's been about his choices. He made the choice. He had the opportunity to be able to still get to see you guys, and he chose not to, knowing the consequences, and he still chose not to. And I always made it about his choice, and we've had many conversations at this point, as age appropriately as I can,
Sure.
about what really happened, and that he has a sickness, and that he doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, and from a mental capacity perspective, he's not capable. And it's, yes, he knows the difference, but from a child's perspective, they need to understand that he can't tell the difference in that sense, and that that's like, you, in order to explain manipulation to a 5-year-old,
right, exactly
but that he was trying to harm children, and that's why he's in trouble. And that he's been on a grown-up timeout, and all of those kind of words
right.
that
I think that's great. That's a great idea.
Because it was very, very important to me that I be as open and honest in a way that they can comprehend as I possibly can. And so I really tried to be transparent with them. One of the things that I realized later on, and part of why I had so much trauma around my own dad being gone, is my mom tried to protect me from it all. She tried to protect me from what happened, but it meant that I only got his side of the story, which was very much against her. And I never want them to wonder about why I did the things I did. I want to talk about it. I want to share with them. I want to really put blame where it's due.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that shows your kids moving forward healthy boundaries and whatnot too. I mean, that is what the situation is. It's the reality.
Exactly. And so, it definitely took time, but, the other thing in 2020 is I left my corporate job, and I, full-time stay-at-home mom again, all of a sudden. And I realized I didn't have a reason to stay in Colorado anymore either, because his family all continued to take his side and continued to believe that he was right about everything, and I was the horrible person. And I haven't heard from them in even longer.
Oh, wow. Really?
So my kids not only lost their father, but they lost grandparents and
Oh,
aunts
yeah.
and all of that too. They were all in that town, and I wasn't, or my family wasn't. And so I realized it was time for me to leave.
Yeah.
It was time for me to leave. I didn't have a job anymore. I didn't have family support anymore, but the pandemic offered a layer of protection in a lot of ways. And
that's amazing.
I had a whole level of PTSD to still get through. I was still scared to leave my house in case I might run into somebody for a while.
Sure.
And, eventually a lot of that subsided, and we left Colorado in September of 2021. And, our life looks very different now, very, very, very different. And
yes, thankfully so. I'm so glad to hear it. So tell everybody the name of your book, where they can find it. I'm going to link it too in the show notes when this episode airs.
It's The Sex Trafficker's Wife. And you can go to thesextraffickerswife.com, and I will put the links out there. It technically comes out in 4 days, January 10th, 2023.
Yes, we're recording this on January 6th. So yeah, just in 4 days. So by the time this airs, everyone will be able to purchase it and get it, except for my Patreons. They get early access to everything. So they're going to have to wait a couple of days, but everybody else will already be able to purchase it by the time they hear this. So, awesome. And I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read more of the nitty-gritty details and about your journey. So what do you do now? Tell everybody what amazing things you do now.
So in 2020, after all of that all happened, I had this realization, like, I created an impossible outcome for myself. Getting full custody of the kids in the state of Colorado, at least, and in many states at this point, is near impossible. And the majority of people share custody with their abusers or their children's abusers on some level.
They do.
And, even though it cost me over $75,000 in lawyers, it wasn't the money that saved me. It was really the mental shift that I had to make, and the fact that I would not let anything else be possible. And I recognized how much power I actually had to create my own reality. And it really catalyzed the spiritual awakening, and it sent me deep in this searching. It was like, well, if that lady can talk to the angels, I can too.
Mm-hmm.
Was really how I looked at it. And I was like, I need to learn more. I need to act. There's clearly more out there. There's clearly more to this experience. I need to find it. And so I went deep into learning all I could possibly learn. And I jumped into quantum healing modalities. I jumped into trying to open up my own intuitive abilities. And I started to recognize I actually was getting a lot of information already. I just didn't trust it. I didn't trust myself.
Sure.
I didn't know what was real.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are like that right now in that state. Yeah. And just don't realize it, or are afraid it's too woo woo or something to put in, any realization to it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I started realizing that I went through all of this and I got through it and I succeeded in this impossible situation so that I could have not only this compassionate understanding, but I could show people what could be possible in a different
Mm-hmm.
way. And the people are attracted to me when they're in those big traumas and they see that I've created some things. And so what I do healing and coaching today, and I run different programs to help people access different parts of their consciousness and to tap into more of who they are and to get to the point where they trust themselves and they can operate from that place first. And I have huge dreams about what I want to do in the world. I have a desire to start a nonprofit that actually can help people who are fighting for custody from their abusers and the children's abusers and help them with that mental and emotional piece, and potentially even cash grants if I had enough funding, and community, and help people feel seen and heard in their stories, because I know the isolation that people go through and
Mm-hmm.
the amount of ways that they get so stuck and so caught up in all of it. And I want to use this story in every way I can possibly can to help people through.
Mm-hmm.
And I have dreams of speaking engagements and big stages, and like the system isn't exactly the problem, and people will see that, and it is broken in a lot of senses because it's so reactive, but at the same time we can utilize it if we stop giving it all the power to make every decision for us.
Right. I love that. Yes, exactly. We do. Like you really seemed like all of a sudden you walked out of that psychic office like, I know that there's more information. I need to be the one to gather it and get my shit together and present it through the legal, way.
Exactly. Like this, in the end, the system actually did its job.
Yeah.
I just have to be the one to provide the information to it. And I think when we look at the system as this broken entity, it's because we expect the system to be the one to protect us. And that's not how it's designed.
Right. Yep. I love that.
And when the realization I had fairly recently is that, the system actually did do its job. Like the judge made the final call in the end. But my lawyers were shocked at how much information we had. I mean, I had a 3-inch binder full of information and data.
Right.
And, like they said, we have never had this much. Like, you did this, you created this. And so to me, that's the empowering piece. It's not that the system is broken and that we have no choices and we can't fix our lives, that we have all of the power.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to stop giving it outside of ourselves and really step up and to create something for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
With safety and security for ourselves and our children, and with the types of connection and with all of those things that we desire. And really, most humans want the same things. We all want to be safe and secure and connected and abundant, and we all want those things. It's just a matter of trusting that you have the power to create those for yourself. And when you do, and once you have, that's a level of safety and security that nobody ever can take away, because you created it.
Right. Well, that is wonderful. And if any of our listeners are interested in that area of your work, I know you have a different website for that as well. So what is that?
That's amandaquickhealing.com. And you can find out all the ways to work with me as well.
Yep. I'll link that in the show notes also. You have a beautiful website. It's gorgeous. It's just like, it's very visually pleasing to me. I was drawn to it when I was first researching you. I loved it.
I have a lot of fun with it, and it honestly changes every few months as I shift in my energy and what I'm doing.
Yes. That it's funny that you say that, because I spent all day today. It's really been a couple of weeks in progress of changing Crime Curious's website, and all of a sudden I found myself today changing the theme colors from when I started doing this 2 weeks ago to even today. I'm like, nope, these are the colors that I'm feeling today. And I just have a feeling that it's going to continue to change just as I need to work through like my color healing and things like that is what it's going to be.
Well, it's funny because 6 months will go by and I'm like, oh, I'm not that person anymore. I need to change this.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. I have in my house, I have a lot of neutral colors so that I can change all the accent colors, like the pillows and blankets and little cute accent pieces and stuff to pop the color based on what I'm feeling, for that. Right now I'm really into greens. I'm very earthy. I'm going through an earthy phase right now. Connecting with earth more, I think.
Yeah, no, but it really has sent me on a very, very different journey. I'd worked in IT my whole life, and now it's really focused on, how do I empower people, and how do I share, and how do I teach people a different way to look at the world, and that's what excites me and lights me up today.
The social worker in me just loves that about you. It's so funny, the journey that we are on here as humans, for sure. It's so interesting how it plays out. And as terrible as this sounds, I do feel like and this happens a lot for people. It's almost like God is working through you with your terrible trauma and tragedy that you had to go through to help you move on, to go and help others and for others to learn from. And I'm
at this point in where I'm at now here, early 2023, I am grateful for the experience, as hard as it was. And it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. I would not be the person I am today without it.
Yeah.
And, I'm able to forgive in a different way because I can see the bigger picture, and I can see how much I not only needed to go through that experience, but I needed to go through it like I did, because I wouldn't have the compassion and understanding for the people who are staying in abusive situations. I wouldn't know how much manipulation and gaslighting people go through. I wouldn't understand it because people who have never been there can't comprehend.
No, right. That's actually exactly why I wanted to have you on to tell your story. You're the first person on our podcast actually to come and tell their story personally. Usually we either interview people and then just say it for them or whatnot. And so you're the first one that gets to really talk to our audience in this capacity. But it was so important to me to have you because I feel like there are so many times when we're covering cases that people just forget. It's so easy to forget about we're victim focused. Okay. So like if we were telling your husband's story, I would have focused on like if there had been a real 11 and 14-year-old, we would have been focused on their life and like what they went through and things like that. And then your husband is the perpetrator. And so often the victim or the perpetrator's families, their stories are left untold.
Correct.
And it's a shame. And it's something that even since meeting you that I've been tried to be more cognizant of bringing light to how some of the other victims are in this situation. In every murderer case, there is a family that is devastated that their loved one went to that extreme, right? Yes. And they lose that too. I always feel that way in when we talk about parents where a father killed a mother. Those children lost both their father and their mother in that moment, and it's just, I think it's often too easy for us to forget that there is loved ones behind the perpetrators as well, and they suffer also. So
it is. And, when we were doing research on marketing for the book and, you look at comparables and things like that, they could not find another wife's story like this.
Oh, I bet not. Yeah. That does not surprise me.
It doesn't exist. And so when I was like, I have to tell the wife's story.
Yes.
And it was so loud and so important. Like, talk about a message I received in 2020. It was like, this has to be a book. You have to write it out. This is a huge thing that needs to be out there. Mm-hmm. And so, that's really why I wrote the book. And it's not to be told about how brave or whatever. It's really, I want other people to not feel alone. People who are in those situations to know they're not alone. People who share custody with their abusers and their children's abusers are not alone. The people who can't afford to have the fight to protect their kids, they're not alone. The people who have been through these horrific things and don't see another way out, like, you're not alone.
Yep.
And anybody who resonates with any part of my story to really see the possibilities and see the light on the other side, because there is a way through. There really is. Mm-hmm. On some level, there is always a way through.
Yep. I absolutely love that. I think that, Amanda, truly a lot of reason in your specific situation why there's not a lot of information is because I think a lot of women would have struggled with the feelings of I wasn't good enough, so he stepped outside of me, or how did I not see it? Like that, those human emotions of shame and guilt and all of that stuff, and it's really difficult to talk about those areas of ourself, and I feel like you've really done it beautifully here today of just like, yeah, I realize I didn't see it and I know that and I can see it now, but like in those moments you don't, and that's okay. That's normal. And it's just it's so good of you to do that and bring that to the world so that people can, like you said, not feel alone. And I have a feeling there's going to be so many people reading your book that don't just want the nitty gritty on like, what was that like, but are like, you know what, my husband committed a crime that I didn't know about too, or my loved one or partner, whatever. And so what does she have to say about that? I think that there's going to be a lot of people who purchase that need that. So that's awesome.
And I've been sharing more of it in depth on social media as I get prepared for the book launch. And I've already had multiple people reach out to me either in the midst of or have gone through something similar and thanking me for speaking out because they held so much shame and they hid that piece. They don't want anybody to know about that part of their life. And to me, that's the problem is we hold so much shame and guilt and we aren't the ones who did that crime.
No, right.
We're not the perpetrators here, but we feel that level of shame and guilt. And I mean, I will tell you, as I've come out with my story, I've definitely had some not so nice comments come at me. And I don't care. That's not who I'm sharing my story for.
Right. Yes, exactly. Oh, trust me, we get hate mail too. I mean, I mispronounced a town's name wrong once in a whole episode, and I got the nastiest email about it. I was like, I am sorry, I'm not German. I'm terribly sorry. Humans expect perfection all the time when you're putting yourself out there and things out there, and you gotta just let that energy go because you got no time for it.
No, exactly. But we need to stop shaming everybody for the choices they make. If you're not in those situations, you have no idea what you would have done.
It's the judgment. We have got to stop placing judgments on each other as humans. No one, we weren't sent to this earth with a guide to how to be human. Okay. Not a single one of us. So I'm sorry, but no one is going to do this perfectly. And we are terribly judgmental.
We are. And we're then so judgmental of ourselves. And so releasing that and allowing ourselves to take the lessons and learnings and become better people for it and help other people become better people. Like that to me is the point. Yes.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. And like I said, the links to both of your websites and to your book will be in the show notes. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And if I'm going to have listeners, if you guys have questions for Amanda, send them to me, crimecurious@yahoo.com, and I will send them on to her and get them answered for you. So yes, pick up her book, most definitely. Okay. All right. Am I missing anything?
I don't think
so. All right. Follow us on social media. Interact with us.
We message back. We love it. We love you guys.
We do. Yes, we love you guys. So,
and in the meantime, don't forget to keep it curious
and keep listening.
Bye-bye.